I need you to stop whatever you're doing right now. Because what I'm about to tell you, I was standing right there. Maybe 4-5 feet away. And I still have moments where I think, did that actually happen? Did I really just witness that? Because the things that followed, nobody wrote a script for that. Nobody could have. Just hold on. Let me take you back to that morning. It was a Tuesday in late October. Not one of those crisp, golden autumn days that make London look like a postcard. No. This was grey. Properly grey, the kind of grey that sits on your chest a little. The sky was the color of old dishwater, and there was this cold, damp wind coming off the mall that kept finding the gap between your collar and your neck no matter how you wrapped your scarf. I'd been in London for 3 days by then. Visiting a friend, Priya, who was doing her postgraduate studies at King's College. She had an early seminar that morning, so I was on my own from around 8:30, which honestly suited me fine. I'm the kind of person who likes wandering cities alone. No agenda. No time stops. Just walking and watching. I'd come down from St. James's Park. I'd been feeding pigeons near the lake, which sounds terribly cliché, but there's something almost meditative about it, and I naturally drifted toward the palace. Buckingham Palace. That great grey-white block of stone and ceremony that just sits there, absorbing centuries, not saying anything back. There were tourists, of course. There always are, even in October, even on a Tuesday. A school group from somewhere in northern France, I could tell by the flags on their bags, had gathered near the railings, teachers doing that exhausted head-count shuffle. A Japanese couple were photographing each other from every possible angle with a camera that probably cost more than my rent. 2 American men in matching red baseball caps were arguing about which direction Downing Street was, both of them confidently wrong. And the guards were there. As they always are. 2 of them on the forecourt, those tall, still figures in their red tunics and bearskin hats. You've seen them 1,000 times in photographs. But, up close, there's something that photographs don't quite capture. It's the absolute stillness of them. The way they don't fidget, don't blink too much, don't react to the noise or the cold or the fact that someone is currently pressing their phone against the railings and making silly faces 3 inches from their post. The guard on the left, I later found out his name was Thomas, though I didn't know that at the time, was a young man. Couldn't have been more than 22, 23. Tall, straight-backed, jaw set like it had been carved specifically for that uniform. He stood near the central sentry box, shoulders square, rifle at his side. I leaned against the barrier across the road and just watched. As you do. The school group were getting a bit rowdy. A couple of the teenage boys kept daring each other to get closer to the railings. Their teachers were doing that low-voiced urgent French reprimanding that sounds like steam escaping a kettle. That's when I first noticed her. Introducing her, she came from the direction of the Victoria Memorial. I noticed her not because she was doing anything dramatic, not yet, but because she was moving differently from everyone else. Everyone around the palace moves in one of 2 ways. Either they're the slow, tourist shuffle, stop, look, photograph, shuffle on. Or they're the brisk local walk, earphones in, head down, cutting through the crowd with the efficiency of someone who stopped being impressed by royal landmarks about 5 years ago. She was neither. She was walking with this focused, almost deliberate energy. Not fast. Not slow. Purposeful. Like she was walking towards something specific and had been thinking about it for a long time. She was maybe mid-40s. Dark coat, one of those long wool ones that goes to the knee, with a burgundy scarf loose around her neck. Her hair was dark with streaks of silver, pulled back but coming loose at the sides from the wind. She was carrying a large tote bag on one shoulder, the kind that's always slightly too full, and she kept shifting it as she walked. Her face was tight. Not angry exactly, not yet, but held. Like someone doing the extraordinary effort of keeping something inside. I noticed her the way you notice people when you're doing nothing in particular and people watching is your only occupation. She caught my eye for a second and I looked away, the way you do. She stopped near the railings. Not right at them, a couple of meters back. She stood there, and she was looking at the guards. specifically at Thomas, the young one on the left. I don't know why I kept watching her. Instinct, maybe. Or just the idle curiosity of a Tuesday morning with nothing else to do. Build tension for maybe 2 minutes, nothing happened. She just stood there, watching him. He stood there, not watching anything, that 1,000-yard stare they're trained into, seeing without looking, present without engaging. The wind picked up briefly and sent a cluster of dry leaves skittering across the pavement. The French school group had quietened down. The American men had apparently resolved their Downing Street disagreement and moved on. Then, the woman stepped forward. She moved right to the railings. Put both hands on them, and this small thing, is what made me look twice. She gripped the railings the way you grip something when your hands are shaking and you're trying to stop them. White knuckle tight. She was staring at Thomas now. Directly at him. He didn't move. Of course he didn't. That's the entire point of them, isn't it? They don't react. They are trained to be unmoved. But something about the way she was looking at him, I can't explain it properly, and I've tried many times since that day. It didn't feel like a tourist testing the rules. It didn't feel like a joke or a provocation for a silly video. It felt like something much heavier than that. It felt like grief. A woman next to me, middle-aged, sensible anorak, proper London tourist shoes, noticed the woman at the railings too. We exchanged one of those brief sideways glances that say, "Is this going to be something?" Without either of us speaking. The woman at the railings said something. I was too far away to hear it clearly. But she said something, directed at the guard. Her lips moved. Her jaw worked. Her voice carried in fragments on the wind. I caught the tone more than the words. Low. Urgent. The kind of voice that means I need you to hear this. Thomas did not respond. His eyes stayed fixed on the middle distance. His expression did not change. She spoke again. Louder this time. I caught a couple of words. Please. And something that might have been a name, though I can't be certain. Her voice cracked on the second syllable of whatever she said and she stopped, pressed her lips together, composed herself. The woman in the anorak beside me murmured something under her breath. Not unkindly. Just that low instinctive O of someone recognizing distress in another person. The French school group had started noticing now. One of the teachers was watching, hand half raised, uncertain. The woman at the railings took one hand off the iron bar. Reached into her tote bag. The tourist shuffle around her slowed, not stopped, but slowed, that collective, half-conscious alertness that crowds develop when something doesn't feel quite routine. She pulled out a photograph. A proper photograph. Printed, not a phone screen. The kind you get developed at a chemist or a print shop. She held it up toward the guard, pushed it through the gap in the railings as far as she could, her arm at full extension. Look at it, she said. Loudly enough now that I heard it perfectly. Please. Just look at it. Thomas's eyes didn't move. And that is when everything changed. The climax, the slap. I don't think she planned it. I've gone back and forth on this 100 times. And I genuinely don't believe it was calculated. I think it was a woman at the very end of her rope, face to face with a wall that would not yield, and something in her just broke. She didn't shout first. She didn't escalate gradually. One moment she was holding the photograph through the railings with her arm shaking, and the next, she had stepped to the side where the gate section was slightly more accessible, reached her arm through, and the sound was sharp. Very sharp. The kind of crack that cuts through ambient city noise and makes heads turn. She slapped him. Open palm, across his left cheek. The silence that followed lasted maybe 1 second. Possibly less. But, in that 1 second, every person within 30 meters seemed to freeze. I felt my mouth open. I heard the woman in the anorak beside me make a sound I can only describe as a sharp inhale, not quite a gasp, sharper than that. One of the French teenagers said something in a voice gone suddenly, small and young. The Japanese couple lowered their camera simultaneously. And Thomas turned his head. Slowly. Not violently, not with anger. He turned his head toward her, and, for the first time that entire morning, his face moved. His eyes focused. He looked at her. Actually looked at her, not through her, not past her, not at the regulated middle distance. He looked directly at her face. And, what happened next, this is the part one still find difficult to describe, because it doesn't fit any version of what you'd expect. What protocol demands? What training dictates? What every version of this story should logically produce. He didn't call for backup. He didn't raise his rifle. He didn't shout. He spoke. Quietly. Just above a whisper. Leaning almost imperceptibly toward the railing, his voice low and even and completely controlled. Show me the photograph. You have to understand something about what I just told you. Royal guards do not speak. Not on duty. Not to tourists. Not to protesters. Not to anyone who isn't authorized palace staff or a commanding officer. The rules around their conduct during ceremonial duty are extraordinarily precise, decades deep, and the whole mythology around them, the videos, the YouTube compilations, the news stories, is built on exactly that. On the fact that they do not break. So when Thomas spoke, when those three words came out of his mouth, quiet and deliberate and completely at odds with everything his uniform, his training, and the last 2 centuries of royal protocol demanded, the woman at the railings looked as stunned as the rest of us. She stood there with her arms still half extended, the photograph slightly crumpled from where her grip had tightened. Her chest was heaving. The coat she was wearing had a button missing on the left side. I noticed it then. The kind of small absent detail that your eye catches when your brain is trying to process something it doesn't have a category for. She stared at him. He didn't repeat himself. He just waited. His expression had shifted, not dramatically, not into something readable from 50 feet away. But, up close, which is where I was now, because I had moved without quite deciding to, stepped forward like everyone else in that slow magnetized pull toward something unfolding. Up close, his eyes were different. Still controlled. Still the face of a man who had trained himself to present a surface. But, underneath that surface, something had shifted. Something personal and heavy. Something that looked, if I'm being honest, like recognition. The woman looked at the photograph in her hand. Then, she looked back at him. Then, and this is the image that doesn't leave me, she pushed it through the railing again. Carefully this time. No shaking. Just slowly, gently, as though she was handing something sacred through that gap in the iron. Thomas looked at it. He looked at it for maybe 4 seconds. 4 seconds doesn't sound like long. But, 4 seconds of a royal guard in full ceremonial dress looking at a photograph that a crying woman has pushed through the palace railings is approximately 4 centuries longer than anything that situation is supposed to last. His jaw moved. Just once. A small tightening. The kind that means something hit somewhere it wasn't supposed to reach. The security response. By now, we had company. 2 palace security officers had appeared from the direction of the forecourt gate. Those are the plainclothes or semi-uniformed personnel who handle public incidents, distinct from the ceremonial guards. They move differently. Less pageantry, more purpose. One was a broad-shouldered man in a dark jacket who was already speaking quietly into his collar mic as he walked. The other was a woman, slightly shorter, with a sharp professional calm about her that immediately made the crowd step back half a pace. They reached the railings quickly. The woman with the photograph turned when she heard them coming and I watched something collapse in her face. Not guilt exactly. More like resignation. Like someone who had expected this and had come anyway, and now it was here and it wasn't a surprise, but it still hurt. "Ma'am," the female security officer said. Firm. Not unkind. "I need you to step back from the railings." "I wasn't," the woman began, then stopped. Swallowed. "I need to speak to someone. I've been trying for months. Months. I just need someone to, ma'am." Firm again. Thomas, throughout all of this, had returned to his position. Shoulders square. Eyes forward. Rifle by his side. The moment, whatever it was, had passed, or appeared to have passed, and the ceremonial machinery had resumed. But I was watching him. I'm not sure anyone else in that crowd was watching him specifically. They were watching the drama at the railings, the security personnel, the woman's face crumbling as she tried to explain herself. The crowd had swelled to maybe 30, 40 people now. Phones were out. Not many. This wasn't the kind of moment most people immediately knew how to film, but some. I was watching Thomas. And I watched him do something that I am still, to this day, not entirely sure I interpreted correctly. He turned his head, fractionally, barely enough to notice, and he looked at the senior security officer. The broad-shouldered man with the collar mic. And he gave the smallest, most controlled nod I have ever seen in my life. The senior officer saw it. I'm sure of that, because his stride changed. He slowed by half a step. He looked at Thomas. Thomas had already returned to his forward position, face blank, eyes on the middle distance. The officer stopped walking. He put a hand lightly on his colleague's shoulder and said something very quietly. She glanced at him, then at Thomas, then gave a small professional shrug and stepped back slightly, not away, but no longer closing in. The broad-shouldered officer crouched slightly to the woman's level. She had sat down on the pavement now, I don't think deliberately, I think her legs just gave, and he spoke to her in a voice too low to carry. Whatever he said, she looked up. Her story, I didn't get all of it that morning. Parts of it I found out later, from the news coverage that followed, which was strange and smaller than you'd expect, and from a conversation I had afterward that I'll tell you about. But what I gathered in pieces, from the fragments that carried, from what the woman herself said between attempts to hold herself together, was this: her name was Margaret. She had a son. His name was Daniel. Daniel was 24 years old and had been serving in the British Army, not with the Household Division, not ceremonial, but with a regiment that had seen active deployment. He had been injured. Not in combat, as it turned out, but in a training accident that had left him with a spinal injury and what the Army's medical assessment had classified in its careful, administrative language as a non-service critical condition. Which meant the support she felt her son deserved had been caught in a bureaucratic tangle for 11 months. 11 months of letters. Of phone calls that looped back to different departments. Of being told the claim was being processed, was under review, was awaiting secondary assessment. 11 months of watching her son, who had signed up at 18 and served 6 years with, by her account, complete dedication, sit in a flat in Coventry unable to work and unable to fully understand why the institution he had given himself to seemed to have misfiled him. She had written to her MP, written to the Ministry of Defense. Had a consultation with a veterans welfare organization that had helped her draft a formal appeal, which had been acknowledged and, then, apparently, gone quiet. She had come to London because she didn't know what else to do. She had come to the palace not because she expected the king to walk out and solve it, she said, almost laughing through her tears at the idea, but because she needed to stand in front of something. Something that represented the institution. Something real and physical that she could look at and say, this is real, you are real, my son is real, and this is not acceptable. And the guard she had reached out to Thomas, she had recognized something in his face, she said. Even through the bearskin, even through the perfect stillness of him. She had a feeling. A mother's instinct. That he was young and he was someone's son too, and maybe she knew it was irrational. She knew maybe if she could just make one person see, the security officer listened to all of this. Then, he stood up, adjusted his jacket, and made a phone call. The unexpected turn. I want to be careful here because I don't want to overstate what happened next. I'm not going to tell you the king personally came out. I'm not going to tell you there was some movie moment where the gates swung open and someone in a ceremonial sash beckoned her in. That's not what happened. What happened was smaller than that, and somehow more powerful. After about 15 minutes, during which the crowd had partially dispersed, partially stayed, everyone uncertain about the etiquette of witnessing something this raw, a man in a dark suit came from inside the palace grounds. Not through the main gate, through a smaller side entrance that most tourists don't even register. He had an ID lanyard and a tablet and the contained, efficient energy of someone who deals with people in distress for a living. He introduced himself as an officer from the palace's public liaison office. He actually sat down, on the cold pavement, which I thought was either remarkably human or carefully calculated, and I'm honestly not sure which, and he spoke to Margaret for a long time. I couldn't hear most of it. But I could see her face. And her face went through something while they talked that I don't have a precise word for. It wasn't joy. It wasn't relief exactly. It was more like the thing that happens to your shoulders when you've been carrying something heavy for so long that you've forgotten your shoulders could sit in any other position. And then, something shifts. And you feel the weight differently. Not gone. But differently held. He gave her a card. A specific name. A direct number, not a general inquiry line. He told her, and this bit I did hear, because she repeated it later to the security officer, that her son's case would be personally flagged and she would receive a direct response within the week. She held the card in both hands. Like it weighed something. Thomas I almost forgot about him in all of this. I looked back toward the sentry position and Thomas was still there. Exactly as he'd been. Red tunic, bearskin hat, rifle, perfect posture. Nobody watching him would have known that anything had happened. He was back inside the performance of his role completely. Except the left side of his face, in the gray October light, had a faint red mark on it. Just below the cheekbone. The kind that fades fast in cold air but is visible, briefly, if you know to look. And his eyes, those carefully directed eyes, flickered once. Just once. Toward the spot where Margaret was now being helped to her feet by the female security officer. A flicker. One frame. Gone. I don't know what it meant. I've thought about it a lot. Whether he had recognized something in her situation that was close to something he knew. Whether the photograph had shown him something that mattered. Whether he had made the decision to break protocol, to speak, to nod, to set something in motion out of a very private and very human understanding of what it means to serve and to be failed by the thing you serve. I don't know. But I remember that flicker. I remember it the way you remember the details that don't make the official story but are somehow the truest part of it. Margaret was not arrested. I want to be clear about that, because when I've told this story since, people always assume she was. Striking a royal guard on duty is, technically, an assault. It is also, technically, a matter that could result in charges, depending on the circumstances and the discretion of the officers involved. She wasn't charged. I found that out from the brief news coverage that appeared 3 days later, a small piece in a mid-tier online outlet, the kind that writes about these things without drama, with the careful language of an incident that the relevant parties have decided to handle quietly. The Metropolitan Police confirmed a woman had been spoken to and cautioned. No charges were filed. The official line was that the guard had not requested prosecution, and the palace had not indicated a desire to escalate. That last part. The guard had not requested prosecution. I read that line several times. I met Priya for lunch that day, a small Italian place in Covent Garden, which she'd been to dozens of times and which I immediately loved despite myself. I told her what I'd seen, stumbling through it over pasta that I kept forgetting to eat. She's a calm person, Priya, the kind of person who listens without filling the gaps, which is rarer than it sounds. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Twirled pasta around her fork and set it down again. Do you think he knew? She asked. Knew what? That she wasn't dangerous. That she was just. She searched for the word. Desperate. I'd thought about that. I'd been thinking about it since the moment it happened. I think I stopped. Tried again. I think there's a difference between someone who reads people and someone who has been trained not to. And I think he chose, in that moment, to be the first thing instead of the second. Priya nodded slowly. That's quite a thing to choose. Yeah, I said. It is. We ate in silence for a bit. Outside the window, London moved the way London always moves, relentlessly, affectionately indifferent. What do you think was in the photograph? Priya asked. I'd wondered that too, endlessly. Her son, I said. In uniform, probably. The way you photograph someone before they deploy. When they're proud and it shows, and you're proud too, but also terrified, and you don't say so because they need to go. Priya looked at me. That's a very specific guess, she said. It's the only photograph a mother holds like that, I said. The coverage was small. I want to explain what I mean by that, because it surprised me. In an era where a tourist sneezing near a palace guard can end up with 300,000 views, this story, which was genuinely extraordinary, by any measure, generated remarkably little. A few clips circulated, yes. Most were partial, picking up from different angles, mostly capturing Margaret from behind and the security response. Thomas's moment, the 3 words, the nod, wasn't captured clearly by any of them, at least not in a way that made the story obvious. There was a brief flurry on social media. Most of it was, predictably, divided. Some people were outraged about the assault, how dare she, lock her up, disgraceful, and some people were defending her, the system failed her son, of course she snapped, and some people were captivated by Thomas's apparent deviation from protocol and couldn't decide whether it was beautiful or concerning. The veterans' welfare organizations picked it up. A couple of them shared it with commentary about the broader issue, the systemic backlog of medical and support claims affecting serving and former military personnel. Those posts did better than the drama posts, which I thought was quietly hopeful. A journalist messaged me. I'd posted a brief account on my personal account, not the dramatic version, just a few honest sentences asking if I'd speak to her. I thought about it for 2 days and then said no. Partly because I didn't think I had enough of the story to be useful. Partly because it felt like something that should be allowed to resolve before it became a narrative. Partly because I kept thinking about Thomas, standing back in his position, and the fact that whatever he'd done it quietly. No flourish. No performance. And I wanted to honor that somehow, in my small way, by not turning it into one. A week later, Priya sent me a message a week after I'd returned home. She'd followed up, being Priya, she'd actually followed up with the Veterans Welfare Organization that had been cited in one of the social media posts. She had a contact there through her university research, something to do with healthcare policy and military populations. She told me that a case matching the details, a mother in her mid-40s, a son with a spinal injury from a training accident, an 11-month administrative backlog, had received a direct escalated review that week. That the review had identified a clerical error in the original assessment categorization, which had been causing the claim to route incorrectly. That the error was being corrected. She didn't have names, she was careful to say that. Her contact hadn't given her names. It could have been a different case entirely. It probably was a coincidence. But Priya doesn't believe in coincidences particularly, and neither do I when something lines up this cleanly. I sat with my phone in my hand for a long time after reading that message. In my kitchen, where the afternoon light comes in sideways and turns everything slightly amber. Thinking about a woman standing in cold October wind, gripping iron railings, holding a photograph of her son up to a face trained not to see it. Thinking about 3 words. Show me the photograph. Thinking about the way systems, large, impersonal, procedural systems, sometimes have small human pivots inside them. People who are also people, even when dressed up as symbols. Who notice? Who choose? Who redirect something quietly and don't announce it. Margaret, I never met her properly. We didn't speak that morning. I watched her leave. She left with the female security officer, walking toward Birdcage Walk, the officer saying something with a hand lightly at her elbow. She looked exhausted. The kind of exhaustion that isn't about sleep. She was carrying the tote bag on her right shoulder now, both hands free, the photograph presumably back inside it. She was walking steadily. She looked, I thought, like someone who had done the most frightening thing they could think to do and had come out the other side of it. Not triumphant. Not relieved. Just done. Just having done it. There's a specific dignity in that. In the not knowing whether it will work, and doing it anyway. In the showing up with a photograph and a cracked voice and 11 months of letters and saying, I need someone to look at this. I don't know what happened to her in the longer term. I don't know Daniel. I hope he got what he needed. I hope the card with the direct number led somewhere solid. I hope by now he's alright, or getting there. I hope she's alright. Thomas the First. Think about Thomas most. Not for dramatic reasons. Not because what he did was some cinematic act of rebellion. It wasn't that. It was small. Careful. Done within the bounds of what he could do and, no further. He didn't abandon his post. He didn't make a speech. He didn't become a character in someone else's story. He made a small human choice in a moment when every system around him was designed to prevent exactly that. And, then, he went back to being still. I've tried to find out more about him, not intrusively, just the way you look for context when something stays with you. I haven't found much. Which is, again, how he handled the whole thing. Without footprint. But, I keep thinking about what it takes to be that kind of person. To stand perfectly still for hours in the cold and, the scrutiny and, the noise of the world going past you. To be turned into a symbol, a photograph, a tourist novelty. To exist, in your working hours, as something representative rather than personal. And, then, to hear something. To see something. To feel the weight of a single moment press through all that training and, all that protocol and, all that centuries-deep institutional machinery. And, to speak 3 words. Just 3. Show me the photograph. Not because the rules allowed it. Not because anyone would have blamed him for staying silent. But, because there are moments when silence is its own kind of violence, and, being truly still means sometimes you have to move. The crowd. One last thing. As I turned to leave that morning, after the security officer had walked Margaret away, after the liaison man had folded himself back through the side entrance, after the courtyard had settled back into its tourist rhythm, I noticed the crowd that remained. About 15 people. Maybe 20. Some of them were still watching the gate where Margaret had gone. Some were watching Thomas's sentry position with a different kind of attention than before. Some were just standing. And, a few of them, the woman in the anorak, one of the French teachers, the Japanese couple with the expensive camera, were doing something very simple. They were just standing quietly. Not filming. Not talking. Not shuffling on. Just standing in the gray October morning, in front of those great gray-white walls, not quite ready to move. Like they needed a moment. To hold what they'd just seen. Before the city took them back. I understood completely. Ending line. There are buildings built to be unmoved, and there are people trained to be unmoved, and then there are mornings when something human slips through every wall we build, and reminds us that the stone and the ceremony and the perfect stillness are not, in the end, the things that hold us together. The things that hold us together are 3 words, offered quietly, through iron railings, on a cold Tuesday in October, by a young man who chose, just for one moment, just once, to be a person before he was a symbol.